You know what? After all these years, I'm starting to rethink my thoughts on punctuality. This is the ArsenalVision Post-Match Podcast. My name is Elliot Smith. You can block me on Twitter, Yankee Gunner. Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and lie to you. It's not what I do. It's not what I'm about. I tell you the unvarnished truth. You tell me that you hate it, but that's how this works. And so I'm going to be honest. I have never been super punctual. But in light of a television show that I am watching, I am starting to rethink whether I need to work on that particular skill set. Obviously, I'm talking about All or Nothing. I want to let you know there will be some thematic discussion of All or Nothing today. What I mean by thematic is like some things that have raised thoughts about the club, about the manager, about the players, but without ideally going into specific moments in the show that might ruin it for you if you haven't watched yet. So in other words, if you find themes to be spoilery, there may be some of that, but we will try not to spoil like, oh, remember when this guy did this specifically. So tightrope walk that we will do, and I'm sure we will at no point violate the rules that I've just outlined. Now, Clive is unavailable today, unfortunately, and Tim is unavailable today, and Scott is unavailable at this time of day, and Paul computer is broken. So it's just me for the... No, I'm kidding. We do have a guest. His name is Andrew. You can find him on the Arscast and on the All or Nothing show quite a bit. Hello, Andrew.
Hello, Elliot. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. It's first of all, thanks for like helping out in my time of need here.
Saving your ass? Is that how you say it?
Saving my ass. So, well, I've got normally 3 different people who do that, so it's just you today. And just to get a little bit inside podcasting, so there's a recording environment that I normally use, and for whatever reason, my login to that recording environment wasn't working, and so we're using your login to that recording environment, and so I feel like I'm playing away. Right? Like I feel like I'm on the away pitch and I'm getting used to the way they've cut the grass stuff. It's really a bizarre feeling for me right now.
Okay, well, I mean, it's a bit like when you're playing a game of football and when the other team doesn't have enough players and you have to go and play with the opposition, or you send someone to play with the opposition. It's a bit like that, but no slide tackles, I promise.
I appreciate. Well, we'll see. I will say also that congratulations on your regular appearance, without being too spoilery, in the documentary. I had my tap in the last 5 seconds of the last episode they put out in the scenes for the next episode, so I can at least say tick. But are you enjoying hearing yourself show up in the All or Nothing doc?
It is a bit weird, and I'm sort of listening to all the other voices going, "Who's that? What podcast did they get that from?" etc. etc. But yeah, look, I mean, people have asked, and the production crew, many of whom are Arsenal fans, it has to be said. This wasn't sort of written and directed by Jeff Bezos, from his millionaire or billionaire's lair, wherever that is. But, they're Arsenal fans, so they came and looked for permission to use certain clips and certain snippets from the podcast, which, I'm happy enough to do. And it's quite interesting to hear yourself as part of something that is... obviously being watched by a lot of people and enjoyed by a lot of people as well, I think.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to be fair, your show is listened to and enjoyed by a lot of people regularly, so that's not totally unknown to you. What I will tell you that it was a little different for me because they said, we want to use this clip of audio for you, but we want to let you know that when your audio is playing, there'll be a caption on the screen that says you need to stick to baseball. So, I wasn't sure, but I just said yes to it anyway.
You're right. Right.
It's funny. I really liked episodes 1 through 3, and I thought there were some insights in it. But like for me, it felt more like recap of football season while getting to know the players a bit, which was kind of fun. These episodes, though, I think it took the show and the insights and the understanding up a level. I'm curious if, first of all, you're enjoying them and you agree that this latest drop, as the kids say, had a lot more meat on the bone.
Yeah, I think they did. Obviously, without going into any specifics or too many specifics, there's a lot of Aubameyang in episodes 4 and 5, and that, of course, was a major thing last season. I don't know how many podcast hours we must have spent between us discussing that situation, what would happen, what could happen, what's the best thing to happen. And behind the scenes, you get some insight into sort of how it went down and how it was reacted to inside. And I think there's something very interesting about how it all played out in the end. When you do watch these episodes, there's a particular point of view within the club, and then there is Mikel Arteta's point of view.
That was so interesting to me. Yeah. What do you think of that?
I thought that was fascinating because clearly they have backed him to make the right decision that he feels was the right decision, even if they might have had some concerns over that. I think it's perfectly normal. I mean, if everybody else was saying, well, this is our captain, our highest paid player, it leaves us short up front. If we all had those concerns, we're not alone. They had those concerns as well. So it was quite interesting to see that sort of play out. But in the end, we all know what happened and how it all went down. And the manager's mind was not for changing.
Yeah, it sort of confirms where the locus of power is related to player movement and player decisions, and it rests with the manager. And I think that's good. I think it should. I do think it's interesting as I watched it, because the funny thing is, I've spoken a lot about this last season, and there were times when I felt one of your jobs as a manager is to find a way to make these tricky situations work. Clearly, the leadership at the club felt similarly, but as I watched it, and maybe this is as Amazon intended, but as I watched it, I found myself thinking, I don't see how there's a way back. It would have felt very strange. You know, if you think about this as a TV show, it would have felt weird reintroducing that character at that point in the TV show, if you know
It
what
was
I mean.
almost like Pam Ewing or Bobby Ewing, wasn't he?
Yeah, exactly.
Pam Ewing appears in the shower.
Yeah, that's a show that came out like a couple of years ago, by the way, not an old
Yeah.
show.
Nobody's gonna
Yeah,
have any clue what I'm talking
no
about.
clue, no clue. But I got you. Yeah, so there's that. Let me ask you this too. The one thing that I'm somewhat cognizant of is, as I found myself sort of feeling like it would have been difficult for the player to come back into the fold, and feeling that maybe the right decision had been taken with respect to what's happening in the dressing room, it struck me also that we're not getting cutaways and one-on-ones with Aubameyang himself, right? We're getting a lot of the manager's perspective, the club's perspective, seeing how the team reacts. But do you feel that because we don't really get the player's view on it at all, that it is going to give you a very specific perspective in the way you view it?
Yeah, I would have liked a bit more Aubameyang, but I guess my guess is anyway that there is probably some kind of NDA involved in his contract termination and his departure, and maybe going into detail could have been in breach of that. I'm not 100% sure.
I see what you mean.
I mean, what did strike me is, you know, people will have seen the news story, so this is not a spoiler. There were stories doing the rounds during the week about how Mikel Arteta kept a dossier on Aubameyang and his various misdemeanors,
Transgressions,
and everything else, the transgressions, and that, you know, what you're led to believe. I think the story that we've been presented in many ways by the club over the last number of months, and certainly when all this was happening, was that this was a cumulative issue where just so many things happened. It was lying in the sand time. I still think that there might be something about this situation that we are not privy to, that isn't in the TV show. I don't necessarily think there is a smoking gun, if you like, but I just have a suspicion that something happened between the two of them, or words were said which made the position, how do I say it? That there was no coming back from whatever was
point
said.
of no return. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like, I mean, I do feel like that, because at the same time, you know, you do have to have discipline and non-negotiables and all of those kinds of things. But I just think that there is a layer to this story that we're probably never going to be able to get. Like, he, at the time and in this, feels completely justified about the decision that he made. And I don't think I don't think you make a decision like that without doubt, some kind of doubt, unless there's been something significant occurring. And I don't mean to say they came to blows, or I just feel like there's another bit of this, but it might explain why we don't see too much of the Aubameyang side of the story.
Yeah, I mean, the The other thing I will say is one of the things I look for in people and in these kind of situations is, do they have self-awareness? Do they have the ability to see themselves, and their issues and their transgressions? And one of the things, and this isn't a spoiler, this is just a little moment because I can't really touch on this issue otherwise. Mikel is asked a question by a reporter, by a journalist. Is it sort of possible that this makes you look like a dictator, right? Like you're just trying to show it's your authority and that you have the authority in the situation, impose your authority on it. And he sort of brushes off the question in the press conference. But in walking away, I believe he might have been with Marcanella, but he's walking away and he references the reporter's question. He's like, I see what he's getting at there. He's got a point, but it's really not about me. The thing I liked about it is it reflects a self-awareness that, like, I understand the point that people will have that I'm just trying to be a dictator, but no, here's why I'm doing it. And I really need to make sure that I'm careful with this, because the sense that I really got, that I have to admit I maybe wasn't as forgiving of or understanding of in the season, in the moment, and I'm still not sure how I feel. It's evolving. These things are always evolving. Is that he's very cognizant of setting standards for the other players, and the concern that you have this captain, this leader, this flashy guy who's a big personality in the dressing room, and that the players will emulate his behavior. There is a concern about that. And later on in that very episode, there's talking about, like, some of you are training well and some of you are training like crap. And if I'd been it's during his COVID absence, he would have kicked some out. I think you can see that there may have been more to this, that there might have been a fear that there was going to be contamination that occurred if this behavior and this influence was left in the dressing room. And I'm wondering if you think, especially given how young the side is, that was in his mind and in his thoughts in terms of how he had to deal with this.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense, actually, when you say that. He is a very larger than life guy, Aubameyang, in terms of his personality, and when you're building a young squad, I guess you do want them to. You could look at Aubameyang, a guy who's in the final years of his career. I think he's always been a fairly trendy guy, flashy guy, the cars and all that kind of stuff. It's always just been part of who he is. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I just think that is part of who he is. But you do get the sense that there is a level of seriousness required from Arsenal players under Mikel Arteta, that this is something he demands on the training ground, in games, even to the extent of the way he wants them to live their lives. You look at Smith Rowe, and when he talked about the way he ate and the food that he ate, and how changing his diet really helped him. These are young guys who are brought through at academy level, who are told, like, the chances of you making it maybe they're not told explicitly, but they understand that the chances of making it at a club like Arsenal are pretty slim, right? So every single thing you can do to give yourself a competitive advantage, you should be doing, right?
Yeah.
At the same time, though, they're young guys, and they like Nando's, and they like McDonald's, and you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it demanded, let's say, a bit of a rethink from Emile Smith Rowe, even after he'd broken through into the team. And I suspect that is part and parcel of the day-to-day culture at Arsenal. Is this is work? You're at a big club. There's a bit in maybe the 6th episode, and again, this is not going into real specifics, but Ben White talks about a number of times the standards that are required at a club like this. And I guess if your captain isn't living up to those standards, people will say, well, you got rid of him for just being late. But if you're never on time, if you're always late, it's disrespectful to your colleagues, to the manager. If everyone else has to be there and you just can't be arsed doing it, that causes problems in any walk of life, not just football. If work starts at 9:00 every morning and you come in at 9:30 and your colleagues are going, well, he's coming in at 9:30, he's leaving at 5, we're coming in at 9, leaving at 5. Why are we doing, management has to take some kind of action on something like that. And I know it's not a great example, but
to be fair, I only did it a few times, and I was only a little drunk from the night before. So I just want to clarify that.
Probably with you one of those nights. Yeah, I mean, I think that might be. I think that might be part of it.
Yeah,
I think it might be part of it.
I have to admit, right? Like, you can't watch this show without getting more connected emotionally to some of the players and the manager. It gets me super fired up to I mean, I was going to say to like root for them this season, but if I was going to root for them this season anyway, so it sounds silly, but if you get what I mean, it just increases the intensity of that excitement and that passion for them. It got me thinking though. So I'm watching this series with my wife, who doesn't really follow the football because there's just too much of it around her at all times. And she's loved Arteta through this. And at one point, as we're watching this second tranche of shows, she turns to me and she's like, "It's getting a bit intense, isn't it?" And I noticed it too, actually. It struck me when she said it that like, you need I wanted the pressure valve to release. Now the show is doing that to you, right? The show is ratcheting up the pressure and the intensity, but it made me wonder, do you get the sense that he could add another club to his bag, so to speak, that a joke and a laugh wouldn't hurt him, a bit in terms, and he may have it, and the show's just choosing to play this angle, but there's so much passion, intensity, expectation. There's vulnerability too, which is good. I think that's another level, but I found myself feeling almost anxious at times in the show because his intensity is so infectious, even through the screen, that I wonder, like, I look at someone like Klopp, and this is all from, such a distance, so we don't know, and the show is giving you just a window, but like, Klopp in his own way can just be really goofy. And I'm wondering if you think that as Arteta matures into the job, or if you even think he needs it, there's a layer of sort of lightness that can be added to the tools he's using with his players to relieve some of that pressure, especially when you get into situations like the NLD or the Newcastle game late in the season, because that intensity starts to feel a little suffocating when you're watching.
Yeah, I mean, there is a bit of that in the 6th episode. I think there's a bit more of Arteta, the person, the human. Like, let's face it, Mikel Arteta is never going to be, never going to have his own Netflix stand-up special. He's not that kind of guy. I'm not saying he can't have fun, but I think he's a guy who's pretty intense.
He's not going to be Jerry Seinfeld. What's the deal with these footballers?
I think that's just the way he operates. I think it's just who he is. I think to when you think about like everybody in the world who plays football, every single person who plays the game and loves the game, to go from San Sebastian, to go to the Barcelona Academy, to go to Paris Saint-Germain, to go to Rangers, to go to Everton, to come to Arsenal, like that guy has worked so hard to do that because he was a good footballer. I really liked Mikel Arteta as a footballer, and I wished actually we had signed him from Everton a good few years before we did. But I think it's just who he is, and that's the way he wants his players to behave. Again, I think part of it is narrative. Part of it is the way the show is being scripted and sculpted and presented to us. Like, I'm sure there's loads of stuff, fun stuff that happens on the training ground, but you can't do a show where like Arsenal haven't scored in 4,000 hours of football.
And then he's juggling.
He's on a unicycle. You don't know that's going to really fit into the show. But as I said, there is a bit more of Mikel Arteta, the person, in episode 6, and actually, you're talking about getting to see more of the players and rooting for them a bit more. Like, can I ask you a question?
Yeah, please. How
have you viewed Granit Xhaka through this series?
It's funny you ask that because I have a little notepad. This is going to sound super normal, like a thing that normal people do, but I've been taking notes as I watch because I do get caught up in things as I watch them. This happens to me with the games, and then it ends, and I go, I don't remember anything that happened because I was just so caught in the moment. And like in bold, underlined, I'm loving Granit Xhaka, right? Like and this is the thing, and it's a beautiful thing about the show, and it's a reason why I'm glad we have it, because you can look. You have to be able to recognize that the first goal of these players is to step on the pitch and play the football well. Right. I think it's pretty funny when Lacazette's asked, which do you prefer, the journey or the destination? He's like, the destination. And he's like, wrong. It's the journey. you had a 50-50 chance and you blew it. But like, but that's kind of how footballers need to think, right? Like, if I step on the pitch and I score 3 goals and we win the game and we raise the trophy, I did my job. Right now, I get that it's not that black and white. But so I don't want to pretend that the things that have frustrated me about Granit Xhaka were always wrong. I'm bad. I mean, maybe, fair enough. But yes, you see, and it should be obvious. There's a reason every manager has picked him, the reason he was a captain, the reason he's so loved in the dressing room, the reason he's able to come back from what happened out on that pitch on the day that we don't need to, revisit. Because it's hard not to like this guy when you get close to his attitude, his professionalism, how much he cares. The moment after the Man City game, I wanted to reach through the screen and give this guy a hug, right? And of course, I can tell you on a podcast that day, I wasn't saying that.
No,
right?
that's for sure.
And to be fair, both sides of that coin are real parts of the game. It's okay after that Man City game, as a fan and an analyst of the game, to be frustrated with what happened with that guy on the pitch, to the extent that you think he even did anything wrong. Let's be fair. I think I probably came down on the side of it's a harsh penalty, just to be clear, just in case anyone wants to go back and listen to that episode. But
you mean the second Man City game? Yeah.
Yes, sorry, yeah, the one we played great and lost. Yeah, I mean, he had incidents in both, to be fair. But setting that aside, yeah, like I like getting to see the things that make me love the players that pull on the shirt, because ultimately, while your analysis should be clear-eyed, like I don't think you should just develop a favorite, fall in love with the player, and then not be able to say that they were good or bad or whatever. You know what I mean? Like I like liking the players, and this makes me like them. And this brought me closer to a player that I have had a fractious relationship with as someone who talks about Arsenal. So yes, I liked it. I warmed to him. That's a very, very long and complex answer leading nowhere. So why don't you now, for the sake of clarity, tell me how you felt about Granit Xhaka watching series?
I've really warmed to him, and I've warmed to him a lot in the last year, maybe. And I think he comes across as a great guy in this, like a good guy in the dressing room. He's quite funny. There's a bit where he's talking to Saka, which is really, really funny, which I won't spoil for people, but it's very, very good. And like you know, he's frustrated me down the years. He really has frustrated me at times, but I don't doubt his desire to do well for the club. And I think that's part and parcel of why he gets picked a lot. You know, that attitude is very much in line with what the manager wants. He wants players who are driven and ambitious and determined and who care. And I think he really does care. People will say, well, fuck him. You know, he has had loads of chances. He's made loads of mistakes. I can't bear him, which is fair enough. I'm not here to change anybody's mind or anything like that. People are perfectly entitled to their opinions about players and everything else. But I warned him, and I think he comes across very well in this series.
Yeah, I mean, that's a more succinct way of saying exactly what I was trying to get at. And I think that one of the challenges I might have this season, that we all might have, there is going to be spillover from watching this series in the way we think about the manager, the assistants, the players, because we feel we've gotten an insight. And then they're going to go do things on the pitch, and we're going to have to try to synthesize how we feel based on those two inputs. But it's the things on the pitch that ultimately are going to still matter the most. And one thing that there's so much noise around football, and you can find yourself caught up in the narrative. Like, an interesting thing to do, if you're on Twitter, for example, you know, a lot of us will have Twitter open while we watch the game. And so you see how people are reacting to an individual player, to how the game's going, and it infects your view of the game. Watch a game with no internet and just watch the game. Then log on to something like Twitter and see how much you align with or don't align with what the narrative is. And it is hard when there's hundreds of messages scrolling past you at light speed about, oh, this guy stinks. And you're like, well, I don't see it that way. But 5 minutes later of reading those messages, you may start to come around to the idea that, yeah, maybe he's not having a good. So this
So many
show,
people are saying this. I could be wrong.
yeah, and so I think this show can have a similar impact too, in that it's going to lead us naturally to feel a certain way about some of these guys, and then that feeling is going to have an impact on how we look at the season. I have to admit, like, I'm liking them all more though. There isn't a player really I'm coming away and being like, you know what? On second thought, I don't like. It's like, is there anyone that's come off not so good to you, or where they're leaving you cold?
No, I don't think so. I think, obviously part of this is stage managed is the wrong word,
Yes.
but I think, there's probably they're not going to do anything that's going to make anybody come across really poorly. Even Aubameyang, despite whatever happened and everything else, they show him return from the AFCON, doing his training, etc., etc. And that must be difficult, training away from the group. When you're a senior player, these are your mates as well. These are your friends. And all of a sudden you're just training, with a fitness coach or whatever it is. But I don't think that there's anybody who's come across as any worse. And, it does tie into what we were all thinking and talking about last season as this team began to develop. And you think about the Leicester game. I know we'd won the North London derby, but that Leicester game was when I first started to really think there was something going on with this team.
Mm-hmm.
And I liked the reaction afterwards. I liked Arteta's reaction afterwards where he said, we haven't done anything yet. We've got to stay humble, blah, blah, blah. Keep your feet in the ground. That message was pretty consistent. But I think around that game, we started, as a fan base, I'm not speaking for the entire fan base, but just, you started to get the sense that this was a good bunch of lads. They had their flaws. Maybe some of them are still a bit young, a bit raw, developing, et cetera, but they seemed like a likable bunch, who were new and fresh and different and weren't old and from Chelsea or looked like Hank Scorpio or, you know what I mean? The guys that, we'd endured. The guys that we'd endure, because when they give you guys like that, when they give you the old guy from Chelsea, they're supposed to make a difference now.
Yeah, it's true.
That's why they're signed. We could see that these are guys who, we want them to make a difference now, but we understand that it might take a little bit of time. And I think that understanding coupled with, someone like Ramsdale, just think about what the Twitter storm and all that kind of stuff was around Ramsdale before he signed.
Yeah.
And how long was it before people were going, hey, you know what? This is a good goalkeeper and a really good guy. What a big personality he is. What a fit he is for this team. So I think all this, the things that we're seeing within this show are sort of backing up things that we came to learn last season as well. And there's probably going to be some disappointing aspects to that over the next few episodes as well, because, there's part of me that goes, this is interesting, but I don't know if I necessarily want to relive.
I had the same thought.
The season.
Yeah, I mean, I don't, because also now you've gotten so close to these players over the course of the season. In the moment when it was happening, I didn't want us, the fans, to be disappointed by the end of the season. I lived through that. I don't want to watch them, the players, get their hearts broken. You know what I mean? Now, because much like characters in a show, you're caring about them in a different way, and I don't want to have to watch them go through the crushing disappointment.
That's another. I'm curious as to their reaction. I'm curious as to the reactions. Those are some of the things that I like the best. Are the unfiltered reactions, or little bits where they kind of forget the cameras are there, which doesn't happen that often. I don't think, when cameras are there all the time. There must have been a guy before every away game whose job it was to go into the dressing room and put up cameras.
Yeah.
So when the sort of curtain falls a little bit and you get that unfiltered access to their thoughts or their reactions, those are very interesting. And I'm sort of, without wanting to relive the derby and certainly that Newcastle game again, I am curious to see what the reaction was like in the dressing room, because some of the reactions when things haven't gone well have been really, really interesting, Even sort of the first 3 episodes. So I presume everybody's pretty much seen those at this point. But Ramsdale's reaction to not getting his clean sheet, I like that sort of stuff. So I'm curious to see what the dressing room was like. I presume quiet and disconsolate, but there might be just some people who pipe up and have something to say that makes you think about, what we might do or might inform what we think we're capable of doing this season.
Yeah. I think that's well said. And like the one thing that you do get also, I see the one thing, we've gotten like 7 things already. This isn't the one thing. This is one of the things. There is sometimes this worry that I think fans have, it doesn't matter to them. It's just a paycheck. They collect their huge check. They go, it matters to us. It doesn't matter to them. And what you realize from watching a series like this, right, is this is their life. They do almost nothing else. When they get 2 days off, it's a special treat. But the rest of the time, this is their life. And yes, it's a big paycheck. And I'm not saying they'd bleed for the badge, but I am saying that when you are this wrapped up in something that is this intense with the same group of guys in this kind of combative kind of environment, right, where it's us against them every week, you're going to care. It would be very, very hard. You'd almost have to be a sociopath not to care. And you do see that they care and it affects them. And then you layer onto that, to your point about young men, young people, I think, have the capacity to ride the highs more and ride the lows more, right? As you get older, you start to even out a little bit and realize that it ebbs and flows. So I think you really see that they care. I want to move the conversation on to actual Arsenal, like current Arsenal stuff. But one last thought. Do you have any thoughts on Edu? He gets a little bit more time in some of these episodes, and he's someone that I think we're all kind of curious about a little bit. There are some funny little moments in there where, like, it almost seems like he doesn't love the pressure of having to perform under the scrutiny, right? When the January window opens, like he's got some trepidation about that.
Yeah.
But I'm curious. I mean, he comes across very likable, but I'm curious if what you thought of his sort of credibility and who he is, and just any takeaways that you had from him in the show.
Yeah, look, I've sort of wondered about Edu privately and on the podcast a few times. The closeness to Raul Sanyehi and some of the other agents, it didn't always sit very well with me. But I think he comes across in this as extremely likable. I think he is. He's certainly, when it comes to incoming transfers, doing good work for the club. The outgoing thing is a discussion for maybe another day, maybe a discussion for another year. If you think that when we start to sell players next summer or the summer after, there might be players that we don't necessarily want to sell, or, as fans, we would prefer to keep them around, but because they're valuable assets, we might have a better time selling them. But no, I think he comes across very hardworking, good, seems to have a good connection with Arteta. And I think that's important. The relationship between the technical director and the manager, if that's not working, then I think you're going to really struggle as a football club to build anything, to do what you want to do. Because if the technical director wants one thing and the manager wants something else, well, you've got a big problem. If they are more closely aligned, it doesn't mean they have to agree on everything, but in principle, if they're more closely aligned, then it should make the job of building a squad much easier. And I think we've seen that with the recruitment in the last 12 months. What happened last summer, what we've added this summer already, hopefully a bit more to come before the end of the window. But it seems to be strategic. It seems to be something they agree on. He did say in one of them, didn't he? One of the early ones, like, you can never just give a manager a player. If the manager doesn't want him, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, I think. So, yeah, he comes across well, quite funny in his way. Seems to have more than the one blue shirt as well, which is great. His wardrobe was worrying me a little bit, but
no, that's his signing shirt. He can only use that on signing days.
I tell you who I do like as well. I like Carlos Cuesta, who is the individual development coach. He just seems like a really positive guy to have around. still really young. He's only 27, 28. So I think that's quite an interesting aspect to this, is that he's sort of,
he's the bridge, isn't he?
yeah, I mean, Arteta's really young and Edu's really young, in football terms, in when it comes to the jobs that they have. But this guy, he's of an age where he could be a footballer. But I like him in this as well. I think he's one that people will enjoy.
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? Because one of the players in one of the first 3 episodes, and I can't remember off the top of my head who it was, basically said they like Carlos because he's young like them. He can sort of understand what they're going through.
I think it was Nuno.
Was it Nuno? Yeah, that's right. Who also comes across great. So, all right, let's shift the conversation.
Okay.
But first, okay, that's enough of that. Now, we have Leicester coming up this weekend. I don't think it was a Monet against Crystal Palace, but we did a rewatch over on the Patreon side of things, and just to the first half, but the whole first half was a lot better than I thought. There was a little wobble in it, but by and large, I thought our principles of play were good. The way we controlled the game was largely good. And the team feels pretty settled right now. And so regardless of people coming back into training or, availability changing, I think we can presume that 11 is the 11 we're going to go forward with, at least for as long as it looks like it's working. So do you expect we'll see the same team go out at home against Leicester?
I guess so. They're going to, they gave Tomiyasu 45 minutes, didn't they, in a under 21 game? So they got some minutes into him. And I can see from the training pictures that Fabio Vieira and Emile Smith-Rowe are in full training as well. So that's good. Kieran Tierney was on the bench. It would be great to have those guys back in the squad on Saturday, because just having more options from the bench would be useful. I think it will be useful against a team like Leicester, who on their day are a very good team, who will provide us a real challenge. They're not going to come and expect to be rolled over or anything like that. So it's going to be interesting to see how the substitutions work and how Mikel Arteta deals with the 5 subs thing. I'm not sure we're going to see 5 subs in every game or anything like it, because it might just be too disruptive to basically change half your outfield team, unless you're sort of trying to radically shift something in a game, come from behind and you throw on as many attackers as you can. So I think it probably will be, barring any fitness issues we're not aware of, it'll be the same team that started against Palace. I think it should be the same team that started against Palace. It feels very solid to me. At the back, it looks good. Up front, if Gabriel Jesus can run at the Leicester defence the way he ran at the Palace defence, I have a suspicion that he'll get off the mark in his first game at home. And I think he'll be looking for that as well, to get off the mark as quickly as possible. You don't want to go 3 or 4 or 5 games without scoring. I know he did score all those goals in pre-season, but and that could be just me inventing a problem that hasn't happened yet. You know what I mean? But I do think it'll be the same team. I mean, what change would you make even if everybody was fully fit? I think that team deserves to start again.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could say right back if Tomiyasu was fit, because Ben White is sort of deputizing there. I think he's been great. I actually really liked his performance against Palace. Some people apparently didn't, but I mean, he took their most dangerous player and kept him largely quiet. I don't think you can argue with that. And that's a very, very difficult matchup for anyone. We saw Cedric struggle with it last season. So I don't think Ben White is our long-term right back. Some people may disagree. I still think it's Tomiyasu's position, and I think we've somewhat forgotten just how much of a revelation he was last season. So that would be a swap that I guess you could make if you thought Tomiyasu was fully fit. But then does Ben White replace Saliba, who was man of the match against Palace? I don't think so. I think it would give you an issue in your squad that you don't need to have right now, because that group looks solid. They've had a whole preseason together. I just let them roll with that group. The other one obviously would be Smith-Rowe for Martinelli. I think it's Martinelli's position right now, and I think it will be for the time being. So, yeah, I would stick with it. I guess, if we didn't have a masterpiece against Palace, although it was certainly good enough and it was a win away at a hard place, Leicester threw away a 2-goal lead to Brentford at home. And we know where the danger comes from with them, right? They've got good attackers up front. The rest of the team, I think, is a bit hit and miss. And I do wonder, there's going to be a lot of eyes on Tielemans, right? Like that's going to be the narrative. I mean, I'm wondering if you think, he'll start, given that the rumors are still out there, and that'll be a thing a lot of people will be looking for, right? If he doesn't start, the presumption will be, we're definitely signing him. But also, if he does start, do you worry about that little, let me show this club that's hemming and hawing about me what I'm all about?
Yeah, I mean, he's been linked all summer. I'm sure he won't be blind to it. We know that when Arsenal go after a player, the player knows that the club want him. All the months of work that Edu did behind the scenes with Gabriel Jesus, if things were that concrete, if you like, with Tielemans, you have to imagine that there has been some contact with the player and his representatives. Why we haven't done it yet? Maybe it's a question of money. Maybe it's a question of squad size. Maybe it's a question of something else. If we've gone a bit cool on him, I don't know. But he will be somebody that everyone's going to look at tomorrow. And if he plays well, I hope he doesn't. I hope he has a stinker, which will make it difficult for people to parse what they really think about this. Because if he has a terrible game, people will go, we don't need to sign that guy. Even though I think he's a very, very good player, and I prefer he didn't play well against us. If he plays really well and makes a contribution, people will be going, why didn't you sign him before you played Leicester? So there's always going to be an element of looking at this from all kinds of angles. Is it the next rung down from a former player coming back to play against you? Player that you've been with all summer and you haven't pulled the trigger on, haven't done
the inevitable no celebration.
Yeah.
I mean, I will say this: the conspiracy theorist in me was like, we're going to sign this guy this week. You know what I mean? Or we're going to dramatically push it forward and try to get, because Leicester have been clear all summer. They have to sell to buy. And in my mind, I was like, you know what? You get him on the Thursday before the game. They don't have time to get a replacement in, and you've taken him out. You just make your life that much easier, right? As opposed to buying him earlier in this, 2 weeks earlier, and they can get the replacement in. But again, I realize there's a lot more that goes into it than that. But that was the conspiracy theorist in me. It does not look like that conspiracy theory, like most of them, is going to come to pass.
No.
One thing I did. Yeah, go ahead.
For that, no, not much left of today for that to happen. So
there's still tomorrow.
Okay. There's the optimist conspiracy theorist in you.
The two things that don't usually go hand in hand. One thing I forgot to bring up during our squad discussion actually is Tierney Zinchenko. Tierney did come in and play, and I thought play well in a limited appearance against Palace, but we saw the best and worst is not worst. Worst is overstaying it. We saw the yin and the yang of Zinchenko. How about that? In terms of just how good he can be in our possession game, distribution, a really interesting dynamic with how he and Xhaka shifted positions. Xhaka often appearing outside of Zinchenko, was Zinchenko almost playing in what we consider nominally the 8 position on the left. The left pod really worked, which is something that was continually an issue for us last season. And I think Jesus is also a big part of that as well. But Tierney came on after we saw Zinchenko starting to get roasted a bit. I mean, it was funny. There was one where he got roasted and he's like, well, I'll just be cynical and pull the guy back. And he couldn't even pull the guy back. He couldn't even get to him there. And I think this is going to maybe, to the extent that there's a question about who is the starting left back at Arsenal. Maybe we get a window into that, and also a window into something people have been speculating about, that is Zinchenko's role, not just to be a Tierney sort of backup or alternate, but also to be maybe a Xhaka backup or alternate, a midfield consideration. So do you think that could be an interesting look? Either that maybe Tierney comes in and starts, or that at some point in this game, Tierney comes in not for Zinchenko, but for someone else, and we see Zinchenko try a different position. What do you think of how that sort of positional battle is developing?
I don't really know, because we just don't have any real sample size, or the sample size is way too small to know exactly what Mikel Arteta is going to do with Zinchenko. I mean, obviously, first and foremost, he's backup for Kieran Tierney. We know that because he started at left back against Crystal Palace. But we know he's also capable of playing in midfield, in that left 8 role. Maybe, I don't quite know. I'm just happy to let stuff play out, which is a boring way to answer this on a podcast. and just
It
see
runs
where we
completely
are.
contrary to the goals we have here to
I'm
have
sorry. I'm sorry.
great content.
You sent me the contract which said you must have 20
Strong
hot takes
opinions.
on this podcast. Yeah. Yeah, it's just a question, I think, of letting the season play out a bit and see where these players are. I think it's a great problem in inverted commas to have.
Mm-hmm.
Like, will it be Tierney or will it be Zinchenko? Will it be Ben White or will it be Tomiyasu? Will it be Saliba or will it be Ben White? Will it be Ben White or Gabriel? You know, these are good problems to have. Because like none of them involve the word Mustafi. And that makes my world just a happier place. But on this one, I think we can see, you know, from All or Nothing, actually, that there are things that the manager wants tactically from his team. And every time you hear a player talk about the manager, they're going like, wow, tactically, this guy sees football the way I'd never seen football like that before. I don't really understand the game, you know. And I think some of the recruitment this summer has been done specifically with that sort of versatility in mind, you know, the ability to shift tactically within games and perhaps even in quite subtle ways, like not, okay, we're losing 1-0, let's take off a fullback and throw on a striker kind of way, but where players are positioned, what kind of role they have in the team. So I think Zinchenko gives you options, certainly, in that regard. The ability to shift your formation or shift a little bit within the game. But you know, as for where he's going to play over the course of this season, I don't really know. But I'm just sort of happy to wait it out and see. But technically, he's just such a good footballer, isn't he? I mean, he's just fantastic on the ball. And you know, the more quality you have on the ball, the more technical quality you have in a team, the better your team is going to be. You know, it's not the be all and end all, but I think we've had some players in the not too distant past who just technically and maybe even physically haven't been up to the kind of football that Mikel Arteta wants this team to play. And I think that is, you know, where we're going. And he's certainly a player who plays a part in that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's funny, right? Because I've often said, like, don't worry about depth. Worry about your first 11. Worry about starting players. You need to build that quality. But people may misunderstand what I mean about depth, right? Like, Saliba is not a depth addition. Zinchenko is not a depth addition, right? They may not start every game, but that doesn't mean they're depth additions. They are starting caliber players who make us better every time they get to play. And that's more what I mean, right? Don't go get a Cedric to be this guy who could play if you have to, but you'd ideally not like to, right? Like, go get players that you think could go fight and win the starting position on merit, and they make you better. And that's more what I mean, right? So, like, there are guys you bring in or you re-sign. Re-signing is a little different. So let me just stick with bring in, where you're like, well, you know, we're not looking to play them, but we needed numbers. They make up the numbers. Those guys will very rarely make you better, because essentially, if you have to call on them, odds are you're not going to achieve the goals you had for that season, right? So if you lose a Ben White for the season and you have to play a Pablo Mari for the season, you're going to have a worse season. You just are. And you can say, well, we needed to make up the numbers. Well, where did that get you? But if you lose a Ben White and you have to play a Saliba, depending on who you are on the internet and how furiously you want to argue, you're not getting worse, and some might say you're getting better. You know, your mileage may vary. The point is, these players that we brought in, they're not depth players. They are starting caliber players who can go fight for their position and add something to the team. And I think that is an important distinction, if you get my meaning.
No, I know exactly. And, you know, it's a balancing act then to try and keep everybody happy and give everybody enough football. And, you know, if a player doesn't play or doesn't start a couple of games, it's not because you're terrible or you've been dropped per se. It's that, you know, we might need to do things a little bit differently. Like, you know, the Ben White Saliba thing is a really interesting discussion. You know, what happens if Saliba's been playing well, but, you know, let's say he's got a little knock or a little ankle strain or something that means he's 70% fit. Like, he can come on and do a job from the bench, and Ben White starts. those things we're not necessarily privy to all the time as well. So some of those selection decisions that often feel a little bit baffling, we're like, well, why has he done that? But I think managing those areas of the pitch in the best way possible to ensure that we get to next May with as many of those first team players fit and available as possible. You think about Ben White in the Newcastle game. I mean, the poor lad couldn't run. He was just absolutely broken. He'd had a hamstring strain. He was strapped up the wazoo, and part of that is that we just didn't really have credible backup or competition for Ben White. Like you say, you can put Rob Holding in there, and Rob Holding's a good, honest player, but he doesn't give you what Ben White gives you, So I agree, bringing those players in and bringing players in who can start is really important. And it's part of why we still have to get rid of a few as well.
Yeah, well said. Last point, then, expectations for Saturday. I think the narrative is so powerful in football. The narrative on Leicester is they're in decline, right? They don't have the money. They have to sell to buy. They haven't really strengthened. They're missing some players with injury. I look at some of the attackers they can put out there. Madison, Vardy. They have a few dangerous players. I think it's one of those dismiss them at your peril, but still looking like a team that we should be able to get past is kind of where I'm at.
Yeah. Look, you can't take anything for granted in the Premier League. The minute you do, you get found out. No two ways about it. And you can be quite sure that Mikel Arteta will be hammering home that point to his players this week on the training ground, that they've got to work hard. But yeah, why shouldn't we feel confident going into this one? We won away from home at Crystal Palace last week. Good start to the season. It sort of assuaged some of our fears that after pre-season, would we fall at the first hurdle? We didn't. And it's been a tricky place for us to go in recent years. Players feel more confident about results than performances, I think. So they'll be confident going into this one. Home game. Fans are going to be well and truly up for it. It's absolutely sold out as far as I can make out. Weather is going to be good, perhaps a little bit too good. They're talking about 36, 37 degrees, so there's going to be a drinks break. It's going to be tough for the players, and that might be a factor. We've got to factor in the weather as well, who manages that best and everything else. But like you, I think Leicester are a good team. I don't take them for granted, but I'm hopeful that this Arsenal team, a team that I think is capable of going places, can turn up, do the job with the fans right behind them, with some of the exciting players that we've brought in and take home another 3 points. So fingers crossed on that.
Yeah, as I often do this time of the week, feel really good about what's going to happen this weekend. And I want to say to you, because it aligns with the conversation we've been having, we had players unavailable today, but you are starting quality. So I don't think it dragged the pod down. It prevented us from getting to our goals. There are maybe one or two people on this podcast that we do need to upgrade, but I think you certainly did the job today. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. I'm always happy to be a late sub or whatever it is, super sub, do the job. But I think you do. You're right. You need to crack the whip a little bit with some of these guys. Yeah. They're easing off. They think they've won it all at this point, and
the problem? I'm not a very good drawer. So every time I break out the whiteboard and draw the stick figures, they're like, we don't know what that is. We can't make it out.
Yeah. Are you I wondered why he didn't have like a whiteboard with magic markers rather than one with flippy bits of paper. So like, do you think all those drawings are being saved in the Arsenal archive, as part of history? This is Mikel Arteta's doodle for the team talk against Liverpool. Here's his funny little testicle man. And
I mean, there's already people selling shirts with the brain holding the hands of the heart, or maybe committing an act of sexual gratification, depending on how you viewed that stick figure. But that is far beyond my ability to analyze.
Would you wear that shirt?
I got to level with you. If we win something this season, I will wear that shirt and nothing else.
I tell you what, if we win something this season, I'll get that tattooed somewhere on me, and there you go.
You better hope we don't win the League Cup then, because it's definitely not worth it for that.
It'll be more than the League Cup. At least
smart. Smart man. All right. Well, I don't need to tell anyone, but Andrew's on Twitter at arsblog. Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, Elliot. Cheers.
My name's Elliot Smith. You can block me on Twitter, Yankee Gunner. We may, if they are willing to return and we're willing to have them back, have the other guys back on in the near future. We'll probably have a full all or nothing breakdown over on the Patreon side with Clive in the next day. There's a rewatch there as well, but mostly just thank you for being here. We love you, and we'll talk to you after Arsenal 10, Leicester 0.